Welcome to the Mixtape with Scott, a podcast where we delve into the annals of economic history, exploring the last 50 years through the lens of the personal and professional journeys of economists. We focus on areas that I like Gary Becker students at Chicago and Columbia, the scientists who work on econometrics and causal inference, and the push and pull of PhD economists into the tech industry. I'm your host, Scott Cunningham. In this episode, I had the rare privilege of interviewing one of my favorite econometricians, Dr. Rocío Titiunik, a veritable powerhouse in the field of econometrics, particularly regression discontinuity design. Rocío, along with her team, has made a monumental impact in our understanding of RDD, as it's called, as well as its practice. She is, with her team, the author of one of the more widely used software packages, RD Robust, which has quickly become an industry standard. What set this interview apart was Rocío's remarkable authenticity and openness about her life. It's not often that I get to talk to someone so willing to share the ups and downs of their career, the uncertainties and the struggles that they endured. We often think we are the only ones like that, and we cover it up really well. So to hear from someone willing and able, someone who is very accomplished in their career, tell us about the challenges that they faced on their journey, well, I found it very encouraging. I hope you do too. Rocío shares her feelings of being lost for years as a graduate student, even before and during her program, struggling to find her place within this vast tapestry of economics, both intellectually and socially, before finally discovering how it all fits together. The story was not just inspiring, it was also deeply relatable. It provided a unique insight into her life and work, revealing not just a significant figure in the field of causal inference and econometrics, but also a human being with her own set of challenges and victories. It's a story of perseverance and self-discovery that really resonated with me. I truly hope you enjoy this enlightening and heartfelt interview as much as I did. And remember, don't miss out on our upcoming workshop on mixtape sessions, where Dr. Titiunik on Wednesday, May 17th through the 19th, will be teaching students about the world of regression discontinuity design. It's a fantastic opportunity to learn and grow with one of the best. So make sure to mark your calendars and join us. Thank you for tuning in once again. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast to stay updated on future episodes. Also, check out my Substack, Scott's Substack, where I semi-regularly post what I call econometric explainers, as well as experiments with ChatGPT to explain econometrics itself. Your support and engagement mean the world to me, and I can't wait to bring you even more thought-provoking and inspiring conversations. Okay, well, it is a pleasure to have on the show. I'm a longtime fan, second time listener, longtime listener, second time caller. So Dr. Rocío Titiunik. I didn't say that name right though. I know that. You've told it to me, but I didn't say it right. How do I pronounce it?
Rocío Titiunik.
Rocío. I'm going to say Rocío. Okay.
Yeah. That's great.
All right. So before we get started, if you could say your name, your job title, and who pays your bills.
Yeah, my name is Rocío Titiunik. I'm professor of politics at Princeton University. That's my job.
Okay.
That's my full-time job.
That's your full-time job. Okay, great. All right. So we're going to start with an icebreaker. Can you share a special memory, a tradition, or a favorite activity from your childhood or early years that has kind of stayed with your memories over these years, and why?
Okay, so I grew up in Argentina, Buenos Aires, in apartment buildings, different ones. And one thing that we seemed to do regularly, at least in the beginning, was to set up a Christmas tree, but we weren't religious. We are a mix of religions. So it was, but we celebrate Christmas in a non-religious way, but we would set up a tree, and the tree was plastic, which later I learned when we moved here that lots of people actually use real trees, but we just had a small plastic tree and set it up with blinking color lights, and very hot in the summer in December in Argentina because it's southern hemisphere, and it was the best thing in the world to just come out at night after most people in the house had gone to sleep and just see the entire living room blinking.
Yeah.
Different colors, with the smell of that plastic tree, which I'm sure was pretty horrendous looking. But just the best thing in the world, and the anticipation of little presents at the top of that plastic tree. And every year it was the same, like, wonder. So I can recall the feeling of wonder. Sometimes I wonder whether there was something magical inside those little packages. I was very young, probably 6 or 7 or 8, but that stayed with me. I'm not sure it counts as a tradition, but it was something that happened year after year. At least in the beginning, my parents were still together.
Yeah. Do you guys still do that with your kids?
We do a more American thing. We get like a real tree. And we decorate the tree. We're not religious either. We decorate the tree, and it's like fun. It's actually fun to set it up. Now I set it up with my kids, and it smells nice, and it also has nice. So we do some of that.
Yeah. Even for non-religious people, the Christmas tradition is has been stripped a lot of that religiosity, and it's just I had such a wonderful childhood with that. One of my memories is we could open one present the night before, and there was this gift, and it was like, as a kid, it was just like, it was kind of big enough and it didn't shake. I don't know why I picked it. In hindsight, I should have noticed. And I opened it, and it was a Bible, and I cried all night. That was quite a bummer. That was not what the 6-year-old kid wanted.
I wanted a toy.
You wanted a toy. Okay. Well, so tell me about your childhood. What you said, you grew up in Argentina. Where in Argentina did you say you grew up? What was it?
Grew up in Buenos Aires,
okay.
Urban, very urban. So the capital, the Buenos Aires city, right? So the capital, the federal district, basically, of Argentina. So it's like the Washington, D.C., very large city. Back in the day, it was 3 million people who lived in the city. It's more now. And about several other million who come from the province that surrounds the city into the city every day. So very, very large urban place. Lived on the 9th floor, on the 5th floor, up there. They're very relatively small apartments compared to suburban life that I have now, big houses and so on. Very urban environment, and very different.
Well, what kind of, like if you're in New York City, you grow up in like Greenwich Village, you're like on the public transportation as a kid. What's it like being a kid in Rio back then?
In Buenos Aires.
Buenos Aires, yeah.
Yes, same. So basically, from a very young age, you started to navigate the city by yourself. I started taking the bus. Well, perhaps I was a little extreme, but I started taking the bus to school in 4th grade. And this was the public bus, not the school bus. So you would go walk to the avenue and wait for the bus. It's such a huge city. You don't need to look at, any timetables. Every 3 or 4 minutes, there's a repeat of the bus that you're waiting for that just comes by. So you just go and stand there, and 3 or 4 minutes, 5 at the most, bus arrives. You used to pay with cash, little ticket, and then travel for about 30 minutes, public bus, and then get off the bus and walk a couple blocks. That was pretty typical. It was a little maybe atypical to be in 4th grade, but 5th or 6th grade, every kid was basically doing the same.
Yeah.
And when I started high school, we don't have middle school. So basically you start in 8th grade, and I would take the subway. So, the commute to school was, walk 4 blocks, take the subway, and then walk down Plaza de Mayo and go to school. So it was constantly surrounded by strangers and everywhere, and lots of people everywhere. Very different from, say, how my kids are today. Grown up.
You think if you lived there now with your kids, you think you could even imagine letting them do that?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think I don't know if 9-year-olds do that these days in Buenos Aires. I don't know if it's any more dangerous than it was back then. We didn't have a sense that it was dangerous in any way to do that. I mean, not not in the areas where we were doing it. But I probably would have a hard time. Although my kids are now getting older, so I think 14, 15-year-old, I would be okay with kids doing that. It was very common as I became, as you were 14 or 15 to come back late at night. You had a lot of freedom, right, compared to what it is to have to be driven by somebody else to go places. You have complete freedom. And that permeated every aspect of our lives, I think, as teenagers, as early, like young teenagers.
Yeah. Well, so what did your parents do for a living?
Let's see. So my father worked in private companies. He always doing the same job at different places. So he recently retired as an expert manager. So my father is very gifted with music and languages. So he still does 5 different languages very well, or 4 or 5 very well. And so he took those skills into his career. And so basically back in the 80s and 90s, before Google Translate and smart smart technologies and so on, language was a real language could be a real barrier. And so he had this ability of being able to pretty much travel the world and communicate. And so he would be in charge of us exporting a particular product, typically from a company. So he first started doing that for meat, so Argentinian meat. So he would be in charge of basically traveling the world and selling meat. Then he did orthodontics, dental tools, and selling that. And then for the last 25 years or so, or more than 20 years, he worked for a rice company exporting their high-end rice to all kinds of chefs all over the world. And so one of the very interesting things about his career was that he traveled the world, literally. And he traveled the world in the early 80s when very few people traveled, right? When traveling was not something that was very common, but I mean, particularly not in Argentina. And this was before, so even though my mother was an immigrant, so I had a sense that there was a world out there. The most immediate sense was that my father would be out of town for sometimes 4 weeks at a time, and he would go to places that for us sounded very, very different. And in places like Saudi Arabia, he will go to Iraq. He'd go to many countries in Africa. And one of the incredible things is that he would bring toys from all these countries. So I had a very diverse set of dolls. Of all kinds of races and ethnicities. There was like a sense that he was bringing a little bit of the world every time he came back in this form of different toys. And he was always very good at the part that he loved about traveling was to getting to know other cultures. So he would get indigenous things from wherever he was, and things that reflected particular to traditions, and bring those home. And so that was pretty magical. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that I had a horizon that was very far, because he was bringing the world to us and showing to us as kids that the world was massive,
was big,
very big. My mom was a professor. She studied philosophy as undergrad, and then actually, funny, she's basically specialized in kind of philosophy of science for a little bit, and methodology of science. And then he got an appointment in the School of Psychology in the public university in Buenos Aires as a professor of methodology of research.
Oh, interesting.
So it's funny that it is not completely unrelated from what I do,
Yeah,
although
sure.
very, very different. And so
That's true.
her training was in philosophy, not in statistics, but later in life, she actually ran into statistics and decided. I remember when she was learning the chi-square test. So
Uh-huh.
my mom had no training in mathematics whatsoever, but she later in life like started learning those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But she worked for a long, long time in the Department of Psychology in the university, teaching methodology of research, in particularly in with applications to the study of psychology.
Oh, that's so cool. I mean, yeah, I haven't actually until you said that, you could totally see how the work that you do is kind of like the
I
philosophy of
know.
science. It's like this is the right way to do it, and this will yield an answer, and these other things won't. It's all about epistemology and things like that.
Yeah, so she did a lot. That was her specialty, epistemology. So it's not, it's not, but it's not unrelated,
It's
completely
not totally
unrelated. It's
unrelated.
not
Yeah.
entirely unrelated.
Yeah.
So the word methodology she used a lot in what she did,
Uh-huh.
and she considered herself an academic. It's very different from what we understand as an academic now, um, but yeah, she had this cátedra, which is more like the German or European style, where basically you are appointed and then you have a group of people who kind of work under you,
Mm-hmm.
and job number one is to teach this class. So she taught this class every semester, but then
Mm-hmm.
as part of that, she would do workshops, and she trained a lot of people under her, and yeah, she was a force, and everybody knew who she was
Oh,
at
that's
the
cool.
university.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's cool. Well,
so she studied a lot. She studied a lot.
yeah, yeah.
She was
So,
passionate.
what were you like as a high school student? What were your passions and what were your interests? And what did your teachers? What did they think about you?
I went to a public university, a public high school, very prestigious, very, very large, about 3,000 students. So I don't think
Oh
anybody
wow.
knew anything about me,
Mm.
or thought anything about me. I never asked this question to myself. Does anybody remember me as a student in high school? I don't know. I was very responsible.
Yeah.
I was very responsible. I was very structured. I was a very good student. Um, I don't know that I allowed myself to pursue my interests. I was
Mm.
very worried about doing well in school.
Mm.
Um, so I guess if I did it again, I would do it differently, probably. But I was I was a student who would always do the homework, and I was a student and I treated every subject equally. And I was always very stressed about school. School was hard. I took it very seriously.
Yeah.
This school it was very hard to get in. You had to go through a year-long process for admission, where
Mm.
you had to take classes after school, after elementary, and then
Mhm.
you had to take 12 exams. I think it was 12 along the course of a year. Then you were ranked based on your grades. Then only a
Oh,
percentage of those
that is
people.
stressful. Yeah.
So very, very stressful for a 12-year-old,
Right.
which I did it as 12-year-old. And so once I got in, I considered this to be the greatest accomplishment for
Sure.
me at that. And so then once I was in, I took it very seriously that
Mm.
and so there was, yeah, so it was very serious all the time. Possibly not the healthiest approach, but that's what it was. The school was very humanistic oriented, a lot of languages, Latin, Greek,
Mm.
um, philosophy, history, very humanities heavy.
Yeah.
And I like that, but I don't know that I explored the full extent of other things. Later on, the later years, you had more like sciences and things, but the vibe of the school was not about science, it was about humanities.
Mm. Did you have like
Um,
a vision of what kind of future you wanted for yourself, like towards the end of high school?
no,
Yeah.
I didn't. I think I was very misguided in how I chose. So I enjoy the humanities a lot. I struggled. I struggle to see the practicality of them. And so if I try to think of myself, what can you do? Being an academic was not, I guess I had seen my mom in the public university. That was not an easy life. You know, low pay, not a lot of. So I didn't have a sense that, you know, you could go abroad and be an academic, or there are places where you can be an academic and actually make a living and these kinds of things. So that was not so I was trying to think of, I guess I didn't see the humanities as per se as a profession.
Right.
But then I had a very hard time. I actually never projected myself as being a professional of anything. And I had this big sense of there's a lot of poverty. I don't know if in the world, probably in Latin America or around me, and I should do something related to that, maybe to understand it. It was very idealistic. I wanted to understand that and maybe do something with it. That's also not a profession.
Right.
So when I chose economics, it was I saw it as a means to an end. It's like I saw a lot of turmoil around me. So I grew up, I mean, Argentina, all times in Argentina are turbulent. And the times when I was growing up were no exception. And so I had a sense that I had a duty to study something that would allow me to understand kind of the tumult around me. But that was a very misguided.
But you had that
way
responsible kind of personality.
Yes,
You
very
were like,
responsible. It was
you were
never
like,
about
it wasn't
what I
about
enjoyed.
you. It was about, you know, got to do the right thing or something.
Exactly. It was never about what you like to do when you wake up in the morning, right? What is it that you enjoy that fills you with purpose? So, so yeah, I would say that's the wrong way to choose what one wants to do. Now that I'm older and more mature, I can see, you know, it makes a lot of sense.
I bet if you live in a country that has a lot of economic struggles, then it's not uncommon to just sort of feel, if you have any ounce of altruism and a connection to the place, that you think, well, I'm smart, I probably need to try to figure this out. Is that true?
It's probably not uncommon, and I see it now in applications from PhD students from, you know, from abroad, that they would often say, you know, yeah, I grew up as a refugee, and so I have so some of experiences that you had growing up as that they you know, shape what they sense of, you know, I need to understand this, as opposed to, I think what is more common here, you know, if you are privileged enough to, you know, grow up without, you know, without lacking, you know, basic access, you know, to education and safety and all these things. I think it's more common to think about, well, what do I like to do?
Right.
You know?
So where did you end up going to college, and how did you choose it?
Well, I went to the University of Buenos Aires.
Okay.
And I chose economics out of a sense that that was probably the thing that would take me closer to understanding whatever it was that I wanted to understand, that it was also not very well articulated in my mind. So I just enrolled. The University of Buenos Aires is free and public and no entrance exam. So you just sign up and just go. So it's called UBA, Universidad de Buenos Aires. And UBA has a lot of different schools, which we call departments, but they're really different, completely separate schools. They're not in the same geographical place, most of them. And the whole place, the whole building, and the whole 5 years is just about the subject that you chose. So if I chose economics, 5 years of econ classes, that's it. There's no sense of there's majors, there's minor, you take 2 years to declare, you explore, you have distributional requirements, none of that.
Well, what do you remember from those classes? I mean, so you oftentimes your first exposure to economics is like a class, a teacher, or people, or books. And I was wondering, you know, of those three, what do you remember? What do you remember being your first kind of exposure that made you kind of intrigued by economics?
I think the first time, so it took some time, like there was these intro classes that were pretty chaotic, you know, it was a pretty big place, like in total, like 70,000 students.
Oh my gosh.
Many of whom were studying, the majority of them are studying accounting. So in the same department, it's accounting, actuarial science, economics, and then administration. So econ was a very small like a relatively small percentage, percentage of the student body. But nonetheless, you had to go into the place with, this thousands of people. So the first few years were pretty large and mostly, impersonal, chaotic classes. But then once we advanced, there was a group of, once you advanced, then the classes became specifics for the economics, track for the economics degree. And so that became smaller. And then within that, there was a group of students who I think had their sights on maybe grad school or maybe who knows, but they were doing extra reading groups. They were, I don't know, the nerds or the academically inclined students. And there was a particular type of class there was a particular sequence that you followed if you were part of that group. So for example, because it was a very large place, there were like 3 different econometrics classes that you could take. One was Monday, Wednesday, the other one was Tuesday. And so everybody knew you had to take Proof-Man's class because that's the hardest. And so that's like the real serious one. And so we would choose the classes. So eventually you started to recognize the people because we were all choosing, the classes that were the most demanding.
This is when your like friendships form, your econ colleagues, because you're like sorting into the same classes.
You are. That's how I met my husband in that group of people. In that group of people who, were doing this track. Like and so many of us ended up being academics or, closely connected, kind of all over.
So was it econometrics that you kept finding yourself getting pulled into, or was it other?
No, not at the time. I have to say that I guess that one of the classes that I remember most vividly, because it's very I guess internally consistent and there's like such a deep framework for it, was micro theory.
Oh, you liked micro theory?
Yeah, I mean, I like I don't know if like it. I like it was a new way of thinking, right? The internal consistency of that entire machinery and framework, and those results, and the way in which you were using mathematics to put out these results. But at the same time, I took this history of economic thought classes.
Oh yeah.
With a Marxist professor who was like a legend at the time. And I devoured those classes, and I love those classes. And I had a very critical view of the neoclassical paradigm that was very much fueled by these classes and a group of people who are like Marxist inclinations that were critical of the neoclassical framework and the narrow notion of rationality and so on. So I found myself gravitating towards this philosophy of economics, like more philosophical aspects of it. And
did you ever talk to your mom about some of that stuff?
A little bit. A little bit. Not as much as I should have. Not as much as I should have. I don't know. It's an interesting question to ask. Why didn't we talk about? I think it was very much in the context of economics, and my mom didn't have any training in economics, so I don't know that I could convey to her what a utility function is, or what or utility optimizing behavior is, or these kinds of things, or completeness of preferences. But I could have tried. My mom was a smart woman, but I didn't. Then my mom got sick pretty early on, and so we didn't talk about those things anymore.
I see. Yeah.
But I guess I remember micro very well, and I also remember my resistance to, there was a sense with these other classes that they were trying to indoctrinate me with this paradigm, and so I had to resist it. I had to learn it and master it, and at the same time keep an open mind.
Right.
And that spirit very much stayed with me throughout and made me struggle a lot then I couldn't fit in after that, after, because most econ students didn't find that appealing, and they would just, this is it, this is what economics is, this is what we learn, and this is the paradigm, and it's fine, there's no problem with it. We had I joined a reading group on Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations. That was pretty amazing. I remember that. It was so hard to read. I had I still have it here. It's in Spanish, of course. I didn't speak, I knew English, but I didn't use English. So, we read it in Spanish, and we took weeks to go through 4 pages.
Yeah.
Discussing the theory of value. Those were fascinating. The things you do when you're 19, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I cannot imagine, life is too complicated now, and there's too many urgent things that need my attention.
Sure.
But at 19, the theory of value was front and center of what we're
it's
trying
so
to
beautiful
understand.
that time in college of living inside ideas and talking and seeing it's such a formative time. It's like I always kind of looked back and felt like, even when I was not being correct in my understanding or arguments I would make, I could tell I was straining into this changing person, these ideas.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. So you are this interesting student. You're this fascinating college student with the holding in your head what feels with some tension, and you've got this close friend, Matthias, Dr. Cataneo. And so you're thinking about, when you're graduating, you're thinking about going to graduate school. Is that right?
That's his plan. That's not mine yet.
That's not your plan.
So I met Matthias towards the end of, kind of in my 4th year. So we started dating my 4th year. So I kind of knew him as part of this group, but we're not close necessarily. And so I was very academically inclined. So I was probably going to continue somehow, but I didn't, and I didn't know how. I had thought about going to Europe. And so those ideas were forming in my head. And when I met Matthias, his ideas were much more formed than mine. So he was also thinking about, it's not that he was thinking about maybe studying abroad, as I was perhaps thinking about. He had already made a plan. And he had already learned everything there was to learn about all the possibilities and how you would get into PhDs in the United States. So this for him was the thing. And I remember.
So you couldn't just go there. He's basically like, there's not a straight line.
No.
Got it.
And there wasn't. You couldn't go from college in UBA to a PhD, to a very good PhD in the United States. That was, I'm sure we can find somebody who did it, but very, very unusual. We didn't know anybody. Like, that's not something you could do, because you didn't have, first of all, you didn't have the training possibly. But most importantly, you didn't have a credible recommendation from anybody that somebody in the United States could understand and could, use as the basis for admission. And also you didn't know what grad school was even about.
Right.
But Matthias had figured out that there were 2 private universities in Buenos Aires, one in the city, one outside of the city, Di Tella and San Andres, both of which had, as faculty members, Argentinian scholars who had studied in the US, most of them, some in Oxford and Cambridge in England, but mostly in the US. They had PhDs, they had come back to Argentina.
Okay.
Those people were in these private universities. They would teach in the undergrad, but most of all, they had this master's program in economics in both places, where these professors taught pretty high-level classes for what it was. So these were people who had been trained in the very best universities in the US. We're talking MIT economics, we're talking Harvard economics, we're talking, Northwestern economics, like fabulous universities in the US in PhD and econ programs. So they had amazing training, right? Something that we couldn't even, understand. And so these people taught their graduate classes in their master's programs, and a lot of those classes rival a first-year PhD class you can find now, right? Back in the day, because they would basically come back to Argentina and model their classes once they became professors after the classes that they had taken as students in these places. And so the level of those masters was very, very high. They were very difficult and very academically demanding. And if you did well there, you could get recommendations from these professors, and that opened doors. So, and they had basically they had a system, right? They sent every year several students, and they recommended those. They recommended, I'm sure, they ranked, because economists love to rank students in particular, but everything, but mostly students. So they were ranked and whatever. But they recommended everybody, and then a lot of those people did well, which basically reinforced future applications from new generations of students, right? Because so it became a connection, right? And so Matthias had figured this out. I don't know how, from just still being a college student, that this is what we had to do, that we had to do a master's in one of these great places, and then from there apply.
Yeah. Get a good letter.
Yeah.
Do well.
Learn a ton. And then apply. And then this would be the ticket to be able to go to great places.
Right.
And I have to say, he wasn't wrong. So he went to Itela. That was the 2-year program, and I was a year behind. And so I decided that I would do a master's in the other private university, that was San Andres, which was just a year long. They differentiated, they competed and differentiated. So this was only 1 year, that was 2 years. And so that would basically align our timing.
So y'all really cared about each other at this point. Y'all were very close. Were y'all dating?
We were dating, and within a couple months of dating, Matthias, actually, as soon as we started dating, Matthias told me of this plan. His plan was to actually try to apply that year without trying the master's in case, but then he stopped that because we started dating. It's becoming a thing that is very powerful. And so he decides to postpone that, and so that we can do the master's and go, which in retrospect, I think it was probably good for his career, in the sense that I don't know that he would have gotten to such a great program straight from undergrad, because that was a struggle. But he just wanted to go.
And he wanted to be with you. But he wanted to be with you.
Yeah. And so we decided, and so it was a commitment. He said, I'll stay. And his friend said, you're crazy. Like, how can you make a decision like within a month?
Yeah.
You don't know this person.
That's a romantic story to an economist. They can follow all this logic. That's like Romeo and Juliet. I mean, that's like,
it was. He said, I stay, and I said, okay, if you stay now, then I'll go with you. It's like, when you're 20, it's like, yes. And that was the promise on both sides, and that's exactly what we did. He stayed, and then I went with him, and so we did the master's. But the thing is, when I did my master's, I became disillusioned. Like, it wasn't fitting with, so it wasn't as straightforward for me.
What's the deal? What are you getting disillusioned about in that master's?
No, it's not disillusioned. It's that it's not clear that I'm enjoying. It's not clear that I see. So I have too much of a critical view of some of these tools, and it's not clear that I see a part of economics that really interests me or makes me very passionate at that time.
Is that kind of is there some like residue from the Marxist sympathies?
Probably, yes. And the classes become much more disconnected from each other, and of course they become much more specialized. So we are doing Bellman equations, right? Dynamic programming class. I mean, we're not trying to understand some phenomenon in the world. We are just doing dynamic programming. It's fascinating, but that's what it is. And so I start finding the narrowness of it, a little bit like constraining.
Yeah.
Intellectually. And so in the end, I struggled a lot. By the end, I didn't finish, like I don't have my degree. So I didn't finish. I mean, I did all the classes, but I didn't write the thesis. I didn't get the degree. I was just yeah. And so and so when Matthias applied, I didn't apply to PhD programs. I had a moment when I thought I want to do philosophy of economics. So when he applied to econ, I applied to philosophy programs.
Oh, wow.
But of course I didn't get in because I had absolutely no background in it. It was just an idea that I had that maybe based on the classes that I had taken, that hadn't been many, that it was philosophy of economics. That was the thing that there were, I think, 2 people in the whole of Europe who did philosophy of economics.
Yeah.
In particular, not philosophy of science, which is already a small, it's philosophy of economics was 2
right.
people.
Right.
Or 3, and so it's not something that is mainstream in a philosophy department. Of course I didn't get in. It was, now that I'm on this side, when you receive all these applications that sound so outlandish, right? Like, I'm a major in biology, but I'm passionate about economics. You go, no, this is not a viable student, right, for a PhD in economics at this time.
Right. Right.
Because they won't survive the first year classes, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
So then and Matthias got admitted to Berkeley Econ department. And so we went to Berkeley.
So you got in?
I did not.
Oh, okay. Keep going.
I didn't get in, but he got in, but I also was lost. I didn't know what I wanted to do. So we just moved to Berkeley. And when we got to Berkeley, so he started his PhD, summer camp and then PhD. And we moved to Berkeley, which is to say we moved to a different country in a different language in, the whole different part of the continent.
Yeah.
2 suitcases, we landed in San Francisco. So it was a pretty the most radical thing that we've done.
Yeah.
Absolutely radical thing to do.
Wow.
Just pack and go. And we landed. I'm the daughter of immigrants. My grandmother had done the same at almost 50. She packed and go. She went from Spain to Argentina.
Wow.
So we did that.
Bet having each other was really special.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. It was an adventure. We were in our, we were 23 and 24, but we were, it was a massive adventure, very young, and kind of the world was like right in front of us. So it was amazing. And once I got to Berkeley and I got to see the university, I went, wait a minute, I need to get an education here too. I knew we were going to be there for 5 years, and I was blown away by the libraries, the free speech cafe, I just couldn't resist it. It was like being, surrounded by, candy.
Just out of curiosity, with that Marxist background, I bet of all the universities that are like neoclassical and mainstream and so forth, being at Berkeley with all that rich history must have been kind of interesting.
Interesting, yes, but the econ program had maybe very little connection to that.
Yeah,
I mean, maybe
sure.
some people doing some history.
Berkeley had some, but the school and the
the
protests in the 60s and stuff.
Yeah. Of course, I didn't know any U.S. history at the time, so I didn't know the meaning, the eras. Later, I started learning a bit as we were walking and looking at those pictures, reading about the movements and so on. But yeah, I started learning about the meaning of the place, and it was, it's a very magical place. So I decided that I needed to get into a PhD program. This needed to happen. And so I went and talked to the philosophy people who had rejected me, and they said, yeah, we'll reject you every time. Like, there's absolutely no chance. We're not interested whatsoever in somebody with your training, and you have no training in, no. So that was very helpful. I'm grateful to the person who gave me a meeting. Can you imagine? I don't think I would. Like, I was a non-student basically emailing a professor saying, I'm a rejected student from last year. Would you can I come see you? And so he gave me an appointment, told me very clearly this will never happen. And so I became very practical at that time. I said, okay, and then I took a tour of the university. I went to the urban planning department. I went to the social work department. I sat in some classes. I started studying kind of the structure of the university. And I understood, look, a PhD is a pretty specialized thing. Like, I won't be able to get into a PhD of any discipline except the one that I know and I'm trained in, which is econ.
Right.
So that's what I should consider. But then I had this independent woman in me, and I said, well, I can't go and try to get into the same program my husband is doing, which, why not? No, but anyway, that was a thought that immediately came to mind, that I can't do that. So it has to be some other program that is econ based, but it's different. And so I found this agricultural resource economics program, which is a department that is not in arts and sciences, is in the College of Natural Resources.
Yeah.
And I went to visit. Like, you have to understand that this is, I mean, we have internet at that point, but it's, but there's still a lot of information that is conveyed, in different ways. So basically, I just went to the department, and the department had an incredible, like, front desk, assistant. Her name was Gail. And Gail, again, I was a non-student, complete stranger just walking in. And Gail, who was amazing and sweet and so helpful, she took a brochure, right, things that we had back in the day, and said, oh, this is a great program, and you're going to love it here. She, in a way, started selling the program to me. And she said, look, this is what the first year looks like. These are the classes of the student. And then she started, like, marking the brochure with a pencil. And so she said, well, in the first year, Professor LaFrance teaches, in the first year. So I think you should go talk to him, and he can tell you more about the program. But I definitely think that you should consider it. And so she was so friendly and welcoming, which had not been my experience in it. And I said, oh, okay. And so then I must have emailed Professor LaFrance, and who again gave me an appointment. Again, this amazes me, to a non-student. And then when I went to his office, very stressed out. At that point, speaking in English is still really stressing me out, right? I'm living in a completely new language. I'm struggling. I mean, I had studied English for many years, but still it was like a shock to be speaking live, right, with somebody in English. And this professor starts screaming, you have to take my class. You have to take my class. Academics, we love our classes. We love what we do, right? We love exactly the work that we do.
Right.
And so he just said, you need to, my class is amazing. It's statistics. It's exactly what you need. It's foundational. Come. And it started last week. So you better just, I'll see you there tomorrow.
Right.
And so I said, okay. And I just showed up the following day. And then I also took, and then I decided that I was gonna audit 2 more classes from the first year in their program. And then I discovered that if I became part of the alumni, this is like really in the weeds, but if I wasn't a student, but I wanted library privileges, so I could get books, because of course we didn't have any money, and I wanted to be able to go to a library and check out books. And so I did some research, and I discovered that if you became a member of the Alumni Association of UC Berkeley, even if you were an alum, which of course I wasn't, if you became a member and you pay your annual membership as a member of the Alumni Association, you had library privileges and a little card. So I did that, so I could use the library. And then I discovered that because it's a public university, they had an extension program for people in the community, which if you paid $600 per class, you could basically take the class for credit. Then that credit you couldn't use towards a degree at the university. It was just for you to have a certificate that you had taken the class. So I paid this extension fee, and I signed up as an extension student, like a member of the community that is taking a public, university class that anybody in the community can do. Of course, nobody does that for a PhD class, but I did that. And what that created was that, and this was my second year in Berkeley, right? All this happened, the second year that we're there. But basically, what this created is I was taking these classes.
You were taking the ARE classes? You were already enrolled?
I was enrolled in the sense of I was not a PhD student, right? But I was enrolled as an extension student. So my name was in the roll of students. When the teachers had, when they went to Canvas, well, they didn't have Canvas, right? But they had like a printed list of students. I was there, and they enter grades, right? I was in the system. And so I took the entire first year of the PhD program as an extension student like that.
This is Berkeley, econ.
ARE, Berkeley.
Oh, so they're not the same classes.
Not at all. No, some of the classes are the same, but the ones that I did in that first year, I only did the ones inside the ARE department. Some of the classes were joined.
Got it.
Some of the classes were joined, and some were required in the econ department.
So you do the first year. You do the first year stuff at ARE.
I did, but at the end of the fall semester, which is the first semester that I'm taking these classes on extension, I applied to the PhD, and I got in.
That's awesome.
And my single application, right? I applied to this program. The thing is, they had so much information about me by then,
right?
Because I had actually we were, admissions is usually December. By the time the admissions committee meets, all my grades were in. So I basically had done the first semester of the first year.
Yeah.
And done well. Of course, I took it very seriously. I knew the stakes. And so I was incredibly lucky and got admitted to the program without, in harsh conditions compared to, peers, in the sense of, they paid my tuition, but they didn't fund me in any way. I had to work from day one as a teaching assistant or research assistant to make it. But I was grateful. To me, this felt like this was, I guess, the second moment. The first was to be admitted to that high school, but this one was, it was. I just felt the luckiest person in the world because I was admitted to this PhD program that was in this university that was from my dreams, and in the same place where my essentially next door to where my husband was.
Amazing.
Already. It was it was just incredible. It was so lucky.
Was Manisha Shah one of your colleagues?
Manisha was there. Manisha was there. Yeah, Manisha and I were part of. Initially, I started doing work with Paul Gertler, who's in the business school at Berkeley and works in development economics. And Manisha was part of a large group of graduate students and others working with Paul in a bunch of projects in development economics. And so I met her through that, and she was also in the department. She was ahead.
Yeah. Well, so that the kind of the pessimism that had started in your master's program about the disillusionment, you now kind of start a new graduate program in a new place. What are you feeling about economics at this point?
That's a very good question. In a way, when that year that I worked really hard, I put my eyes on this program is a great fit for my training. And I didn't ask myself whether it's a great fit for my interests, because at that point it was very clear to me that my interests were evolving and contradictory and all over the place, and my training was very narrow. It was very, so there was kind of a disconnect between my interests were all over the place. But if you looked at my CV, I was a straight econ person.
Right.
I had taken the econ undergrad, and then I done the econ masters, even though I didn't have a degree. I had the entire coursework, and now I was admitted to an ag econ program. So there was no ambiguity.
Right.
But the problem was internal, as usual.
Yeah.
And so that year, when I was really worried about getting admitted, I worked really hard, and that was my goal. And so I excel in these classes. I found statistics fascinating as a side thing, right? So, which was, I took math and I took then I took the ag econ and resource economics kind of classes and IO, and I didn't pay attention to the fact that actually the econ classes were not my favorite. Stats and was, but whatever. I had one goal at that point, which was I need to do my best, and I wanted to be in this university.
You think if you go back to when you're a kid and you go through high school and you go through college, are there signs that you would have been drawn to statistics and econometrics? Is it now kind of in hindsight you can see like, yeah, I was so you were really surprised. So what happened? How'd you have such a positive reaction? Was it a professor or a class or what?
No, I think what happened. Yeah. So I think if I went back, I'd be a doctor.
No, but could you see the signs of it? Could you see the signs? Can you see like, oh yeah, I'm going to be the kind of person now I realize I like to solve puzzles or something like that?
I think my philosophical inclinations. That's the closest that I can, because what happened then is once I got into the PhD, the mainstream of what the program was about, resource economics, and agricultural economics, were not at all close to my interests.
Right.
That was a problem. So that became a problem. And I excelled in all the classes, so nobody could tell that it wasn't my interest, but it wasn't really my interest. And there was another track that was development economics. And so that was closer to my interests. And so I took the development economics track, which was joined with the econ department.
Is that because the development people had all that RCT stuff? Do you think all the causal?
It was kind of in the middle of the, this would have been 2005, 4, 5. So we were in the middle of the credibility revolution, like we were, and so Ted Miguel was in the econ department at Berkeley, and he was promoted while I was there, but he was an assistant professor when we got there. And so he was doing very innovative work in development economics. Paul Gertler was there, and then Alain de Jambry and Betty Sadoulet who were prominent development economists who were in ARE in my department, in the Ag Econ department. And so they were doing a lot of field work. They were doing a lot of experiments. Paul Gertler was also doing experiments. So I was definitely exposed to all of that. And when I took the development economics field, it was very much about about the limitations of non-experimental work and how experimental and non-experimental work. So that was there. But I think the moment when I still wasn't clicking with the questions or the experiments. But in my second year, at the end of my second year, I met Jas Seacon, who was a professor in the political science department at Berkeley, who had just come from Harvard. And he had been trained very eclectically. He was a political scientist by training, but had taken a lot of mathematics and statistics classes. And he was doing work at the intersection of political science and statistics and research design. And he was working in matching estimators at the time. And at the time, research design in political science was not something that was at the front of a lot of substantive work. And so there was a lot to like there was a lot to say and a lot to improve about the way some work was, measuring things and trying to validate claims and these kinds of things. And so when I met Jas, that's when all my light bulbs went on, because he taught a causal inference class for the political science department.
Yeah.
And
was he a Don Rubin or a Gary King student at Harvard?
No, he studied at Cornell. He had been assistant professor at Harvard.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But he definitely had been, there while Don Rubin was there. And he had basically trained himself in causal inference. Causal inference was at the cutting edge. Think about the Hedge and Waba paper, propensity score matching. This is all like, the Body and Imbens, econometric paper on matching estimators is around that time. And Jas was working on matching and versions of genetic matching. And so he taught this class on causal inference that was very much at the cutting edge of all these things that were happening. And I was a teaching assistant for that without knowing anything about it. But so I learned through, by, going to the lectures and then he invited me to work on this project that was something about research design in a very particular substantive question in political science. And it was in that connection in how you could actually use those tools that I found like super interesting by themselves, but apply to, actual political science, actual scientific questions in a particular field, that combination, I just found it incredibly motivating and interesting. So carefully thinking about the assumptions of a research design and what that's giving, how can you interpret empirical evidence? And I saw the connections to policy. I guess I was able to click. And the thing that I liked about political science is that I felt that political science, there was more freedom to ask pretty much any question. So if you wanted to ask an econ question, of course, economics and politics are very closely connected. So nobody would say that a question that touches on economic policy is not political science. But in an econ department, people were very close to ask, what's the economics in what you're studying?
Yeah, right.
If you were studying anything that was a political party or an institution, it was more like, what's the economics of it? And so I got asked this a lot, like, what's the economics in what you're studying?
Right.
And so I found the intellectual I found more freedom, more room to explore my ridiculously undefined interests. And at the same time, when I was in ARE, all these years that I was in ARE, Imbens was a faculty at ARE because he had a joint appointment in the eco department and the ag econ, in the ARE department, the ag econ. And so I took econometrics with Imbens when I was a student. And so I had exposure to I guess a lot of econometrics and statistics from really great people who happened to be there at that time. And then when Jess showed me how that could be used to think about real problems, that a lot of stuff that the people cared about. And I felt at some point, that intersection was my niche, my niche. That intersection was something that actually I could do all day long. When sometimes I train and they say, what's your all day pace? What's a pace that if you could run like 9 hours? So it has to be slow for me. So I just felt I could do this all day. It's fascinating. And that was the first time I felt like that. Up until that moment, it was like always a means to an end.
That's the first time your interests and your training kind of merged.
That's the first time.
Amazing.
That's the first time. I mean,
how did that feel? How did that feel when you finally started to realize that was happening?
Like the clouds moved and the sun came out.
Wow.
For the first time. I mean, I was in the dark. It was very dark at moments, very, very much so. Even mental health wise, I just couldn't find. It was because it's such, PhD is hard work. All of this is hard work. The undergrad, all of it was hard work, such high commitment, and not to get a sense that I can see where it's going, or I can enjoy it, or I can. yeah, it was too long, only because I'm so responsible. And actually, yeah, and because I had Matthias supporting me through it, because that I didn't quit. I'm glad I didn't, but yeah, I think if Matthias hadn't been by my side, I probably would have just quit.
It's
Because it
funny
was just too
how
hard.
that fortitude, I mean, there's so much uncertainty, but it sounds like you just had all this fortitude and you were kind of white knuckling it a little bit. You're just very, very smart and very, very hardworking. But you know, whether or not the meaning of it can happen. And then just when it does come together, you know, that might not have happened at Berkeley Econ or might not have happened in
Oh,
another department.
it might not have happened. I mean, it's serendipity. I learned that word. It's like, why did I need jazz? Is because I had a good friend in the political science department. She was a PhD student who saw the announcement that jazz was looking for a teaching assistant. And there were not a lot of students in political science with the training to be teaching assistants for such a class. So he asked people to forward it along, and she forwarded this to me. And I replied, and he gave me an interview and hired me on the spot. When I told him I took econometrics with events and I did this, and he said, okay, sure. Like that same day, he said, yes, you'll be the teaching assistant. And the rest is history in a way. But that was complete randomness of the world.
Yeah.
I guess the only non-random part is that I was trying to look
Right.
to see if I could find something outside.
Yeah.
I was looking for, is there something that I could do?
There's some endogenous parts to luck, you know, in the sense that the luck can happen, but you may not be standing in the right place or knowing what to look or be looking or stuff like that.
Yeah, so there's definitely some of that. I don't want to say everything, but a huge component was luck, and then a huge component was Jazz's welcoming me into his professional life and supporting me and training me and giving me the space to be a crazy person, right? Completely all over the place and completely eclectic student, and basically giving me the space to do all of this, also encouraging me to train myself more, both in stats and in political science. So I mean, without Jazz, none of this would have happened.
Well, so how do you get into regression discontinuity design? Is that at Berkeley?
That's at Berkeley.
Oh, it is.
That's at Berkeley.
Well, so what are you working on at the beginning?
I'm working on absolutely nothing when I start working with Jazz. So I start working with Jazz in a joint project on redistricting and natural experiments. And then when I TA for his class, he had a week on regression discontinuity because it was this thing, right? Regression discontinuity was, hand-taught and Cloud paper is 2001. So this is like 2005. So it's still kind of recent. The econometric
it's before
version,
that Journal of Econometrics issue, that 08. Is it 08?
It's before.
So it's like pretty early. And maybe even before some of those survey articles.
Yeah, it's before that. David Lee's paper on the randomization in RD is circulating in working paper form, but it's still not published.
Lee Moretti and Butler, that was out?
No, David Lee's paper in the Journal of Econometrics in 2008, where he argues that the RD can give you as good as random assignment in a neighborhood of the cutoff.
Yeah, that's still in the future. But what about that 2001 QJE, that Lee Moretti and Butler?
Enrico I guess Moretti? That was more an application, right?
I see.
So David Lee's paper 2008 is more like, it's a methodological paper about all RDs. The thing about that paper is that he happens to have an application from political science, from the incumbency advantage. So when Jazz teaches that week on RD, well, I had to learn it to teach it to the students in section. I thought it was pretty cool. And I think I probably read David Lee's paper in working paper form and the application to incumbency advantage in US House elections. And I was trying to work in Brazil in something else. I was trying to do a natural experiment in Brazil that didn't pan out. It was a change in the size of the councils and the municipality level. I wasn't I wasn't articulating the project very well, but I collected data on elections for these Brazilian municipalities. And after that week in RD, I said, oh, I have the data to basically replicate David Lee studies in the US House in Brazilian elections. And Jess and I were working on the issue of incumbency advantage in other things. And so I said, this makes a lot of sense because I know a lot about incumbency advantage now in the US. And David Lee has used the RD design to study incumbency advantage in the US. But I will use this that I just learned to study it in Brazil. It'll be an interesting application. I wasn't, I was a grad student, probably not. I didn't have any broader horizon than that at the time. And then I did it in Brazil, and I found that the incumbency advantage was negative, and this was contradicting the entire all the literature, and it was contradicting the results in the US and contradicting the theoretical foundations for why it should be positive and so on. And so this sparked my substantive interest in this and methodological at the same time. And so I still work on this today. So I published, I have a paper and then a book in progress about incumbency disadvantage in developing countries. Came from that original paper. But that prompted me to say, because the first thing I thought was, I did it wrong. I did it wrong.
Sure.
It's wrong, right?
Exactly.
I did it backwards. So I went back and it didn't seem to be wrong. But then I started trying to understand, making sure that this is correctly, that this is done correctly. And at that point, the bandwidth I chose by hand. So, okay, how do you choose the bandwidth? There's this paper circulating by Keto on maximum, MSC, mean square optimal bandwidth. And then Jas taught me Fisherian inference. And then I put together the paper with David Lee, where he talks about randomization. So I said, well, what if you do Fisherian inference in RD? And so we started thinking about locally random RDs in a neighborhood of the cutoff, but literally. And so I put that together. And then
wait, this is your job market paper?
Well, my job market paper was a different thing, but
okay, I don't want to interrupt you. Okay.
No, my job market paper happened to be an experiment in state legislatures. But this was my second paper of my dissertation. This is RD in Brazil. Gosh. Yeah, and then part of that, trying to understand how to make inferences in RD that are correct, because I think that I'm wrong, because this is negative, can't be negative, is like, Matthias, I read this paper, but if I do the local polynomial, like how do we make inferences? Like, are these standard errors right? And and he's like, well, this is non-parametric, and so the standard error is null, technically null, the bias, and so then we start talking, and that's what led to RD robust.
Oh my gosh, no way.
So it starts going in all different directions. And then I also have a paper on incumbency advantage and how to measure with, Bob Erickson, who works in American politics. So it's like this thing that so what the RD did for me is to kind of allow me to keep this intersection of the methodology and the application to a substantive problem very alive. And so my substantive question led to my methodological questions and vice versa. And my finding of negative incumbency advantage led to a bunch of other substantive questions that led to more empirical work and so on, and also fed my interest in trying to understand this thing as well as I could methodologically. Yeah. And that's where so I guess that was the thing that I had learned, which is that where I felt productive.
So a lot of it sounds like your interests start to be in political science a little bit, or a lot.
Yeah.
And then the methodology is like the skill, the years and years of like technical training. And then they all kind of come together and you love both of them at the same time. Is that right?
They come together and they show me a space where I can exist, which sometimes can be very miserable, which is kind of in the middle, where all these tools in some, detail, and statistics, and you can understand properties of things and think carefully about parameters and their estimators and inference and what. But then enough about a substantive problem and that you can actually see how these tools can advance this substantive problem, can help us solve it, find the answer to a scientific question that has nothing to do with the methodology, but that the methodology can help us see. Sometimes a miserable place because it means that I don't know as much substance as the people who do the substance for a living, and I don't know as much statistics as the people who do statistics for a living.
Being the bridge can be, yeah.
So I feel like an imposter pretty much all the time. But it's also the kind of work that makes me happy, and at this point is probably my comparative advantage, or what I feel is my comparative advantage, that bridge between those two sides.
You know, were you surprised at how much work? Were you surprised if you had known at the start how much kind of like, you know, fairly seminal work in RD methodology that you guys would as a team create? Would you have been surprised at the beginning to know that there would be this many papers that would do this many well, and just, you know, for you guys to be at the front of the pack the way that y'all have been able to be?
All of it is surprising, right? If you think about how I got into a PhD program almost through a back door by just taking classes as an extension student, and then, you know, being admitted to the single place where I applied, all that seemed like, you know, yeah, without really knowing where I was going or what I was doing, and without having a real vision, or still, you know, all of it. If I had known that I would end up doing this thing, then I'd probably go back and take a different class. You know, I would train myself, you know, better in some more in some areas. You know, I would do things. No, yeah, definitely. None of this was part of the plan, and all of this is surprising. But in a way, it's also a wonderful kind of example of what happens when you expose yourself to new ideas.
Yeah.
You don't know what's going to happen. So I often tell, you know, when first year PhD students tell me this is exactly what I want to study, I look at them and I think, I don't know, maybe if we do our job right, we'll completely change what you think is interesting, what you want to do. I mean, there's probably some innate interest there, but these years can be transformative. And to me, they were absolutely transformative, literally transformative. They just completely changed everything about how I viewed the world. And of course, you know, jazz was very instrumental in that, and a lot of the classes, but then their work, and they continued, you know, trying to produce that work, and you know, these tools and the application of those tools to these problems, all of that transformed the way I saw things. And yeah, no, I'm intellectually, I'm a completely different person from that college student.
Yeah. Well, you know, I told you this when I saw you a year ago. I have 2 copies of what I consider to be one of the greatest contributions to the causal inference the Practical Intro to Regression Discontinuity Designs Foundations by Cataneo, Idrobo, and Dr. Titiunik. And this is volume 1, right? And there's a volume 2 that's coming out.
Volume 2 is coming. It should be coming out soon. It's now with the press in like the review stages, and hopefully it'll come back to us soon. And I hope that it'll be out this year.
Oh man, I cannot
before
wait.
The end of the year.
That is really a big kept secret. I think that a lot of people don't realize it's got R and stata snippets all throughout it. You know, you really build up all the methods from both like really small principles, even in the coding. It's just a wonderful book that I absolutely adore it. So you've taught a lot of workshops on regression discontinuity design over the years, right? How many have you taught?
Oh, I don't know, but probably, you know, a dozen or more. I mean, more, 20. I don't, you know, a lot.
And you're going to be doing one for the mixtape sessions on May 17th.
Yes, May 17th. This will be my first for the mixtape sessions. And I'm very excited. So I did many iterations of this workshop in which basically the idea is to get the general principles about identification and inference on RD designs explained in a very intuitive way, and then very quickly show how those principles work in practice. So as the guide that we wrote, like there's a lot of fantastic work out there on the theoretical work on properties of these estimators, inference, and so on. And our idea with these volumes and with the workshops is to just bring that to the applied researcher quite concretely. And so, but at the same time, very carefully conceptually very, very precise with a lot of rigor. So with a lot of rigor but rigor that matters for practice, not just for the sake of sounding smart, but rigor that matters for the credibility of your empirical estimates. So the class is very, very much a back and forth between principles of RD and then actual empirical analysis and data illustrations throughout.
Yeah. So I saw RD wrote two things. I sent you this. I asked ChatGPT to make me a causal inference exam with about regression discontinuity design, and and I said I want stata output so that the students can interpret it, and it gave me RD robust output. So I was like,
that's awesome.
I was like, all right,
honored.
well, this is the correct way to do it. If the warlords are telling us to do it this way,
if ChatGPT says it,
it's right. It's the right way to do it. But then I also saw that you have it in Python. That's newer, right?
That's new.
Yeah.
That's new because we have been, more Matthias than I, we have been working more closely in industry with industry folks. And we noticed that those folks many times use Python instead of, well, they definitely don't use data, but instead of R, they use Python. And many times they were asking, do you have this version? And so we decided we expanded the team and we decided to have the Python version of it. And so now it's up and running. We are still receiving, so I feel RD robustness data on R is pretty tested, and there are so many bugs and things that have been addressed, and for size of your data, like all these things that have been optimized. And I think the Python package is getting there, and the more people who use it, the better, because the more quickly we can smooth it out as the others. But yeah, I'm very excited, and we're actually this summer we're going to do the local randomization part of the packages for Python 2, which are still not available.
Oh, awesome.
So yeah, that's very new and pretty much in progress. The idea, but the idea is like to extend to Python that has become much more mainstream, I feel. And also with an eye on people from industry.
Yeah. So you think that people from industry would get a lot out of the workshop on May 17th and through the 19th?
I mean, I have seen I think there's a lot of applications in industry. I mean, it's tricky. You don't see them because they're typically stay in internal memos because this data is proprietary, right? It doesn't see the light of day. But there's a lot of people doing regression continuity with advertisement, the timing of ads, or with several policies that they do at the companies where they change something abruptly, and
well, just even all these algorithms that they move things around with that have all these like underlying
cutoffs,
running
thresholds,
variables.
And so there's definitely applicability of that in industry as well. As I said, you don't typically see it because it doesn't see the light of day, but
you only hear rumors about it. It's like you never see, even with synthetic control, it's like you'll just hear them say how often they use it, and then you're like, well, can I get a case study? And you can't find a single case study. Like it's all kept under wraps. Well, absolutely. so let's end on this. I was curious. The opening line of Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, says, "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom. It was the age of foolishness. It was the season of light. It was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope and it was the winter of despair. So I was wondering if you'd share if there has been in your, now that you're sort of senior, when you look back at things either in the fields of economics and political science or just your traveling, what would you say has been the eras of light and the eras of darkness? You've kind of touched on a lot of it, but I'm just kind of curious, what do you think those things have been?
Well, interesting. I think one of the era of darkness was the time when I was kind of lost in terms of this disconnect. I trained myself to be an excellent student, and that's what I was. And that's what everybody saw from the outside. Well, you're excelling at this, so come work with me on this. And I didn't want to do that. I didn't like it. It didn't interest me. But you usually don't get A+ in things that you hate. You don't even do them. Like, why are you here? And so those years, I was very, very lost, and I felt very trapped. How do I get out of this? Do I leave this PhD, and what am I going to do? And why have I been studying all these years mechanically without thinking about what I wanted to do? And what am I going to do with all this knowledge? And I don't want it. I don't know what to do with it, and it doesn't interest me. And I don't. Those years were very difficult, and I guess a great lesson that by persevering, I could find a way. I could find a way to still use my training and those things, but in a way that I found interesting, motivating, relevant, which are all subjective things, right? About work. And I guess the other one that we've touched, that's for another time, is definitely the first year's assistant professors were an era of darkness, because I started assistant professor in political science department without really having training in a political science department. I had done what I could, taking classes and so on, but I was thrown into the deep end by just being in the tenure track of a very visible department. And I had a very rough landing at the beginning, didn't know how to frame, how to talk to this discipline. I had a very methodological point of view that was not necessarily the view of the, median reader of a paper in political science. So that was hard.
It's funny, you've always put yourself on this cutting edge methodologically, but even as a bridge, being an economist in political science at a top program, it's like you've consistently just kind of put yourself out there and then met the expectations of the situation. It's really incredible.
Well, I don't know. I consistently put myself in places where I didn't belong, in a way. Just and I keep doing that, and it seems that's what I do.
The world's a better place because you keep doing that.
Well, thank you. I don't know, but it's this. I never fit it anywhere, and it's gonna stay like that till the end.
Yeah, good. Well, it's so nice to hang out, and I'm really excited about where you keep going, and I'm going to keep my eyes on you where the cutting edge is, and I'm going to try to run the 9 hours it takes to catch up to where you were when I saw you, and you'll be gone by then. So, but thank you so much for being on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to the workshop on May 17th and May 19th. I think that's going to be really valuable. All right.
Thank you, Scott. I'm very excited about the mixtape sessions. I love the way you structure the pricing and how open you do it and how accessible you make it for people all over the world. So I believe in your mission, so I'm very happy to be part of it.
Thank you. I'm so glad.
Gotta see us through.